we go. I'm sorted. All right. So I thought that we needed some pink, really. Maybe it was just me. I just felt I needed a nice, bright slide design to help us feel optimistic about jobs and things like that. So first of all, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, ko and Gasket, tōku ingoa, no Melbourne, aho. My name's Anne, and I'm from Melbourne, and my family is from, well, I guess diverse parts of regional Australia. So my mum and her family are from Tasmania. My dad is from Beechworth in Victoria, and my husband's from Western Victoria, and it's to my great surprise that I've moved to New Zealand, and I'm working as a lecturer as well, because that's certainly never something I anticipated would ever happen for me. I thought it was, you know, something that other people would do, but that it's not what I would get the opportunity to do. So I guess looking at this map here and thinking about where we are, it's a good moment to acknowledge Māori as tangata whenua of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and to acknowledge traditional owners, past and present, from all those different places where we are at the moment. And I guess I'll introduce myself to you a little bit as a person. So I'm a mum. This is on a picture of one of my kids wearing a pretty awesome little outfit that they put together. I'm also a massive fan of Tammy Nielsen, who's a Canadian country singer who lives in New Zealand. And one of her most inspiring songs for me is called Big Boss Mama. Mama makes the babies and the dinner and the cash, and she pays the band to rock it with the money from her pocket. So that's a song I listen to quite a lot when I need to get myself ready for my day. I also have pet guinea pigs. That's one of my prize pigs there. His name is Jersey, and he's been a very welcome addition to the household, especially during lockdown. So I guess that's a little bit about me as a person. I could do kind of a more professional introduction for myself and say that I'm from Melbourne, and I did a combined Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Arts, went on to honours, did a PhD, did a postdoc, and now working as a lecturer. And in those 5 lines, it somehow makes it look as if this was an inevitable thing that happened. Like at every one of those stages, of course this person from Melbourne became a lecturer. But it certainly never felt like that at all. And as good biologists, we should know that evolution isn't teleological. It doesn't work towards endpoints, and it certainly has never felt in my career that this endpoint was waiting for me. So I mean, didn't know why I was going to uni really. Not many people from my school did, but my mum was super keen, and my nana as well, and they both got their degrees. I guess after they'd had children, they got them by correspondence, part-time. And they said to me, you know, you should do it now. You should do it now before you have other things in your life. So I did it, you know, I almost dropped out. I felt very, you know, alienated by the whole university environment. But, you know, I really liked nature. And when I managed to cobble together enough points to finish both of those degrees, I had met this awesome person. She was a postdoc at the time in the zoology department. Her name's Mariella Herbstein, and now she is at Macquarie University and has been kind of a key figure for quite a lot of us in the ASSAB Society as a supervisor or a mentor. But I met this great postdoc. So she was a TA in the lab that I was doing my undergrad work in, and I was thinking, she treated me like a person, like somebody who might have knowledge and talent and capacity. And it was the first time really, I guess, at uni that I'd felt that, rather than feeling like an imposter, somebody who was, you know, wasting people's time. And she was really, you know, just human. And she was also one of very few women around in the whole zoology department. And so we kind of devised this project. She suggested I do something on spiders. I would have worked on anything, whatever, just to work with her, because she was just a really nice person, and she had, you know, some faith in people. So I did my honours, and at the time I also had a sense of I've got to do this now, got to get this out of the way, because you never know when your family's going to need you to do stuff. So I did that, and then I worked for a few years. There's a bit of a gap there between the honours and then starting my PhD later. What was I doing in those years? I was working, earning some money. I did some travel, falling in love with my now husband. There he is, looking pretty young and fresh-faced there. I worked for Mariella as a research assistant a little bit. She'd got a job up at Macquarie Uni, and so she'd moved to Sydney, and I moved and worked for her a little bit. Worked as a TA, did a bit of this, did a bit of that. I was working in kind of entry-level jobs in a whole range of different places, and it kind of became apparent to me that Mariella was a real outlier in that she really championed me as an early career scientist, whereas the other places I was working, I didn't feel that sense, and I felt kind of excluded from interesting things that were going on. And I kind of realized that if I wanted to be the boss of myself a little bit more, I needed to do the PhD. So that's what I did, PhD. And again, this great mentor I had got me doing my research and helping me kind of be independent about it and helping me kind of talk about it in ways that it was kind of something I was doing rather than something she was sort of supervising me to do. But I did a bunch of TA work, and I did open days, just basically to earn money. I did all these little things, exam marking, kind of online admin for courses. And they later proved really useful when I was going for jobs. A theme that might come out a fair bit today is that a lot of people are really focused on research, and as if that's the only thing you need. But when you're going for a job, the people who are interviewing you, they have to work with you. And the people that they would like to work with are kind of, functional people, capable people, people who are able to think about the sort of the broad range of things that might need doing around a workplace, and who are going to be, collegial. And just focusing on one thing might mean that jobs where what people need is actually slightly outside that, you might end up kind of looking as if you've not done so much of those things, when you probably have. Maybe you just haven't practiced talking about them yet. Another thing I kind of learned was how to take care of my intellectual property and to think of my knowledge and skills as something really valuable and something that I shouldn't just give away to anyone who asks. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, about how to kind of make the most of the things that you spend your time learning, working hard to do, and recognizing that some people can be a bit extractive. And looking after you and your knowledge and is something that is quite important for you. So I did all that, and then, I never thought I would get a job as a lecturer. So the backup plan, so my boyfriend Greg had been a high school teacher previously. So the plan was that we would just ride this train as long as it happened, and then we would, he would go back to being a teacher and I would get my postgrad teaching qualification, and we'd be teachers in a small town. So I like to think that that version of us is still out there somewhere, being teachers in a small town. I hope we have a good life out there. That's my alternate reality. But Greg actually got offered a job in New Zealand. So he was applying for jobs all over the place. And within 24 hours of him being offered that, I got offered a postdoc in America. It was for a funded position. They had got the grant and they were just really struggling to find someone to do it. So I kind of filled the gap for them. And so I went and did that. And then got this job at Auckland Uni as a lecturer. And then I put a bunch of my kind of stuff that I've got involved in at the university since then. There's a few dates. So kind of 6 years into the role, I started kind of picking up more service roles. And these service roles are the things that I think have helped me learn a lot about what employers are looking for. And a lot of kind of learning about what makes a great colleague and researcher as well. So I put my little link down there to my Google Scholar if you want to go look. I study flowers and plant-animal interactions, just been getting into the seabirds a little bit, sensory ecology. So yeah, feel free to have a little look at that if you like. And I just want to point out that the papers I have now are the product of me having been a lecturer for 10 years. So that's 10 years of student supervisions. And if you look at it, you'll see I actually write very few papers by myself, very, very few. And so it's all through collaboration with students that these things have come about. And I think that's actually a real key, collaboration and working with people. So let me tell you about a couple of these kind of key moments where I learned a lot about myself as a researcher, as a scientist, and my work, and had kind of watershed moments. And I think they're kind of useful for to share. So in 2016, I did this thing. The University of Auckland has this thing called the Women in Leadership Program. And a little bit like going to start my undergrad, I didn't know really why I should do this thing, but I'd heard it was a good idea. And I thought it might be useful. And it's a program they have that any women who work at the University of Auckland and have kind of long-term contracts that you can apply to be in it. And you're assigned a mentor who's not in your field but is somewhere else in the university, and they have a series of workshops and things. So to set the stage, I was absolutely struggling on as a lecturer at this point, dragging my body into work when I had to go, just returned to work after having a second baby, and the whole process of having a baby and trying to get maternity leave and everything had been really awful. It really hadn't worked well for me or for Greg at all. I know there's a lot of rules about what people are meant to get, and in terms of leave and support, it just didn't happen when it came to it. So I was in a very low part of my life and very close to just being squeezed out and saying, no, I can't do this anymore. And I dreaded opening my email. What was I going to find in there? More criticism, more rejections, more being asked to do more things, and just was a very low point. So going into this, you had to write your goals down. And my goals were to toughen up, build my resilience, to publish more, to get grants, or to quit and let a better person have my job. Because I genuinely felt that I was not doing a good job, and I was taking a job from somebody else who would be better at that. Then I met a whole bunch of other women and realized that all of us felt basically the same. None of us felt we were doing a good job. And I sort of came to the realization that, oh, it's not me, it's the system. And when people work in workplaces or organizations where their values aren't well matched, they feel marginalized and they feel like nothing they do is the right thing to do, and they can never do enough of the things that are apparently right to do. And I kind of came to this realization that no institution, whether the institution of science or university or CRI or CSIRO or anything, they actually couldn't give me that because they're institutions and institutional values aren't my personal values. But there's people, communities who do share your values, and they can help you find that sense of feeling valued. So even if you're applying for jobs and not getting them, or have a job and very unhappy, or feeling very stymied, the job and the organisation for me were never made me feel any kind of value or sticking with it. So after I did that program, my goals changed quite a lot, and they became, well, I don't need to toughen up because actually being, a sensitive kind of person makes me a really great scientist. It's a different way of being a great scientist than I was aware of. It means I'm good at building relationships and collaborations. I'm very sensitive and aware to patterns in data and behavior. I'm also quite good at assessing what other people need, and that's been good for supervision and teaching and collaborations, but it's been surprisingly effective for job applications, prize applications, and grant applications, because I'm kind of really open now to honing my skill of what the other person needs. What does the person reading this application need from me to give me what I want? So that's been quite helpful. And my other goal was to find people who share those values and work with people I like. And a byproduct of that has actually been publications and grants. So they've kind of flown, they've flowed out from that. So if anyone's really struggling with a sense of themselves of not being good enough for this job, or of never finding a place in this job, I think there's paths to find that sense of acceptance, but maybe not necessarily from the workplace itself. But yes. So my point is that I am never somebody who I would have thought, yep, that's a killer scientist and they're going to go far. But I've, had a good wage out of it, and it's been a once I've found ways around it. Okay, so that was a self-realization moment. The other thing that I think probably more useful for you now is my awareness of what scientists or researchers are kind of valued for, or my sense of, I guess, other people and their work. And the key moment for me was I ended up on this faculty staffing committee, which is the committee in the science faculty at my university that goes on all the hiring panels. So was like 15 people, and we had to take turns. So every single job that was advertised in the science faculty, one of us had to be on that job interview. We had to read all the applications, the whole process, listen to all the talks, and then we had to choose their pay level as well. So look at their qualifications and match them to the description of what each level at the university, say lecturer, senior lecturer, we have this role called PTF, Professional Teaching Fellow. So that meant that I read a lot of applications from people. So I read a lot of job criteria, I read a lot of applications, and I had to kind of bring them together a lot. The other part of that job is that you see the CVs and applications of people who are currently academics. So I read all their promotion apps, I read all their sabbatical applications as well. So suddenly I had the opportunity to see what people were actually doing in their current jobs and what people were hiring for. So before, I had this sense that a great academic was excellent at service and teaching and research, and they were kicking goals in all of those areas, and that everybody else was really doing all those things, and that I wasn't, and that I was, just snuck in there, just holding on, kind of in disguise. And then I read all of these applications, and I was trying to think of how many I must have done hundreds of job application documents, and every month I was on a few hiring panels, and I must have read 500 CVs of my current colleagues, and absolutely nobody so far has met this criteria that I thought everybody met. So I thought everybody was doing all this stuff and that they were all like that except for me, and I realized that nobody is like that, absolutely nobody, and I had a completely false sense of what everybody was doing around me. So perhaps if you're kind of comparing yourself to others, just remember that you're only seeing sort of highlights of other people's things. You're not seeing the full story, and everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. So don't feel that you can't, nobody can do everything. So of course you're not doing everything. I'm not doing everything. Who's doing everything? Nobody. So that was kind of two key moments for me. And I thought, so from those experiences of becoming much more aware of what researchers are doing and also what universities are hiring for, and I've been on hiring panels for other places now too, like the CRIs that I mentioned, or the equivalent of the CSIRO in Australia. So I want to talk a little bit about criteria, about ways to help you identify your own strengths and experience. Just realized I don't have a clock in this room. And also communicating, and I'm thinking a lot about kind of that communicating from the reader's perspective. So I was talking about kind of the ability to imagine, what does that person need from me to be able to appoint me, and to kind of write things in a way that makes it possible for them to do that. I should really get a clock. If I go out, my kids will pounce on me, so I don't. I'll rely on Julie. Okay.
If you want, just let me know if you want me to let you know when it's 1 p.m. or...
Yeah, great. What time is it now?
No, it's 12:30.
Awesome.
12:28.
Great. Great. Oh, I've just realized, no. Somebody send me a chat every 15 minutes and then I can see the time of the chat. No, sorry. Okay, so criteria, job ad criteria. So when you're looking at that job ad, you don't know very much about the politics of how those criteria have been written. And they may have been written by just, one or two people who are completely on the same page, but they also might have been written by, a department of 50 disagreeing people. so you don't really know much about how they've been constructed, but there might be criteria in there that particular people are really focused on, and they're not so focused on the others. But sort of, from that hiring panel that will eventually read your application, you just don't know which criteria are kind of the priorities for different people. So a critical thing I want to show you is that a lot of workplaces are shifting to kind of using spreadsheets. This is a tool to help deal with things like unconscious bias. I'll just check my link should work. Yeah. And I just thought I'd show you the one that we've used at Auckland Uni here. Now I need to do the new share. There it is. All right, can you see an Excel spreadsheet there? Yeah, great. So often what people are doing now is they're listing the people and not by the full name. So they might just use like the first letter of their surname, and they're kind of matricizing it. So the intention is to take it away from the CV or the letter and to put it into something that's more comparable across the candidates. So these is actually, like, obviously I've taken off the people's names, but these are from job interviews that I've been on. So this is one with just like, there's just sort of 4 on the top thing here. Usually the HR will go through first and remove any candidates who completely can't meet the criteria. So just say one of the criteria is you must have a postgraduate qualification. There'll be people who apply who don't. So HR will kind of go through and remove that sort of deal breaker. But typically HR won't be doing any more than that. So they'll kind of just remove that, and then all the other applications will go to the team, all of the hiring panel. And so you can see here, people kind of putting a score sort of out of 0 to 3 for each thing. So maybe a criteria might be cultural responsiveness. They might have mentioned a personal commitment. They might have not addressed it at all, so 0. They might have, kind of increasing levels. Say one of the criteria might be, do you have teaching experience at undergrad and postgrad? And I fill that in, add a few notes, and again, give a score. And so it goes on like that for all of the different criteria. So I don't think you want to have a 0 in each of those. What you want to do is make sure you address every criteria, even the ones you don't meet. Maybe you can find some creative ways to say, well, I'm not experienced in this thing, but I do have that thing. So if you don't meet a criteria, and you don't need to meet them all, then you still need to address them. So yeah, maybe you didn't realize that you are potentially about to be spreadsheeted, but it is actually a very effective way of stopping the hiring panel from focusing too much on kind of things related to gender and race, because it sort of takes just some information, it goes on there, and then there'll be people on the panel who will say, well, you're leaning towards this candidate, but let's look in the spreadsheet here. Let's look at the data on this. And I've found it a very effective tool myself when being on hiring panels to encourage the committee to look more broadly at the candidates and not just keep hiring people who remind them of themselves. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Here we go. There we go. All right, are we on the PowerPoint again? Awesome. So there we go. So address all the criteria. You don't need to meet them all. And often they're not expecting anyone to meet them all. They just cast a wide net. People talk about it. So they might put a bunch of stuff in there in the hope, if somebody actually met all those criteria, that'd be kind of phenomenal and kind of surprising. So don't feel you need to meet all the criteria. And maybe you can find some creative ways to meet criteria that that are still authentic, because you can really tell in an application when people are being inauthentic. It's, if you've ever marked assignments, it's a very similar feeling. You know, you've got your marking rubric, you've got the assignment in front of you, and if when someone starts kind of saying things that are, you know, they're just kind of pulling them out from some, you can tell, you can really tell. Another suggestion was, so you've got your job criteria, but it might be to consider sort of, I've described them as unlisted criteria. So things that they're not mentioning, but that are important to the organization. So I had things like the broader organization and its aims and vision statement, because to advertise this job, the organization or the unit within the organization, say it's a research team or something, they've had to make a case to higher up levels that they need to hire somebody. So they've probably had to say, well, we really need a new behavioral ecologist because our vision statement for our organization says that we're doing this type of work and we're going to move into this sort of stuff. And this position fulfills your needs. So the department has had to apply to the higher levels to try and get permission to hire somebody. So it's worth knowing a little bit about the organization and where that's kind of broadly going. Maybe that might help a bit. And you can definitely Google them. Like if you just Google, you know, say a university and their name and strategic plan, they'll have some pamphlet about where they're going. And they can be very compelling. I have also the suggestion to say you're want to join a particular unit or a department. It's good to know about that, the department itself. Sometimes people think about kind of new courses. I've often heard people sort of be advised to talk about what course would you like to teach if you came to the university, and it would be good to have kind of examples of you know, looking at their current ones as well and go, well, these are the areas I'm really interested in. Of course, I'm terribly flexible, but these are the areas I'm really interested in. And if there ever was the opportunity for a new course, it's actually quite hard to get a new course approved and up and running. So kind of a slim possibility really. But yeah, it's good to know about the organization and the facilities they have available. You know, maybe they've got some great greenhouse facility or lizard arena or something. A sense of the other people in the department or any like core research groups and things. Maybe it's a commercial place, or maybe it's like a CSIRO. Do they have particular contracts or kind of types of people, types of organizations they regularly do contracts with? It's good to come in kind of knowing a little bit about them. And the national context can be really important too. So if you're applying for a job, say in New Zealand, Aotearoa, you really need to know about the treaty. If you're applying for a government job, that makes you an agent of the Crown, and there's a treaty between Māori and the Crown. So if you're not Māori and you're applying to work for a government institution like a university or a research group, then you will be a treaty partner, and you'll need to know a little bit about that. And I had some of the ways you can find out that sort of stuff is, so in the job ads for Auckland Uni, they always have a little thing down the bottom of them that tells you a little bit about the, here we go. Right, so jobs at the university. And if I just scroll down a little bit, I think there's a lecturer one. Oh, there we go, engineering. And there's a bunch of wording in there. Maybe you can see all the Te Reo Māori names for things. And down the bottom here, it sort of talks about the treaty, meeting its obligations under the Treaty of Waitangi and achieving equity outcomes, these sorts of factors. So sometimes you can find out a little bit more about other requirements at the university or other patterns from that. Now, I think I've fixed it so that you can actually see my PowerPoint slides easily now, and I'm switching smoothly between them. Great. Often people do check out what kind of major funding organizations are available, but if you're a biologist, you'll also want to know about the habitats and the species and the major research trends, and have a sense of what sorts of animals and plants you might study there, particularly if you've worked on, I don't know, a special endemic group from somewhere or other. it would be worthwhile having things in mind that you might do in that new destination. And because of my own interest in equity, I'd also encourage you to check things like sort of social factors, like what are the equity groups in that city you're moving to? Maybe you're keenly aware of them yourself, or maybe that's something that's going to be new information for you. So that was kind of unlisted criteria to consider. And now the part that's about you. So don't worry, there are no breakout groups. I'm not going to demand anything of you today. This is just, but do feel free to ask stuff as well. Feel free to put things in the chat or ask. So you've seen what the criteria are, or you're thinking about sort of typical criteria for the sorts of work you're kind of thinking about. And you're thinking about, or how might you show which criteria you can meet and which criteria you have the potential to meet as well. So if you're early career, often people are looking for potential as much as they are evidence. So don't feel that if you don't have any evidence yet, you don't have the potential to meet these criteria sometime soon. If you're talking about research, that's often the area that people feel or have been more coached in, I think. So sometimes I'd be on a job interview panel, and with the research, people were very kind of prepared. They had sentences they were ready to say, they had things to share and examples to talk about. So probably doesn't need too much time from me here, but I guess I just wanted to emphasize that research includes your own research and your collaborations, and also things like supervisions or mentoring, even if they haven't been formal. So I just kind of tried to think of a bunch of different things about it, some things about, say, describing your research that provide some context about it. Is your field big or small? Are you taking some interesting novel angle? Maybe it's a classic or fundamental approach as well. So there's positive ways to describe whatever you're doing. Here's that point about what research would you do in that organization or location. And I also wanted to emphasize that unpublished work is not a terrible disappointment that you failed to do. It's a wonderful asset that can help you have things to work on. So particularly at the moment when it's been so difficult to do fieldwork, you can say, you know, while I establish a new research program, I also have a broad range of useful data that I can publish while working on that too. So please never think of your unpublished data as a missed opportunity. It's just something you haven't got to yet. In terms of collaborations, it's useful to convey kind of both your sort of independence or leadership as well as the collaboration. So I've on job interviews, sometimes people have some really wonderful outputs, like a really high profile paper in something, you know, very prestigious science or nature, or they have a very high profile grant. But that's not worked for them because they haven't really been able to explain their contribution or role in that. And they may have had a very strong role in it, but maybe it's worth kind of practicing articulating your role in things that are group activities, because even if something is seen as, oh yes, a prestigious paper, if it's not clear how that person has kind of been part of that, I mean, often places are recruiting for people who are going to be able to establish and run something, coordinate lots of people, coordinate students, establish a new research program, and you wouldn't want to look like a cog in a machine. So finding good ways to be able to describe what you did is very useful there. I've got a couple of suggestions there to consider building some side projects. And they could be really small things where you've kind of said that you can say that you've also initiated collaboration. So maybe you've been working on a project, your supervisor, you know, defined that project because it was something funded and that's what you needed to do. But maybe you can set up some small collaborations with other people, even if you haven't actually got any outputs from them yet, but they might be still, you know, something that you've reached out for. And just a tip in terms of protecting your IP, your intellectual property, to remember to negotiate authorship and credit before you agree to work for people or work with people. I think many of us have had the experience of somebody saying, oh, I hear you're an expert in this thing, and you feel really pleased. Yes, I am an expert in that thing. And then they say, I'd love to have that sort of thing in my research. And so you spend a lot of time teaching them how to do it, stepping them through it, and they go, thanks. And then you never hear from them again, and you're never credited on their papers. And suddenly they're publishing papers on the ideas that you cheerfully shared with them when you were chatting about this thing. So my useful phrase that I use at the bottom here is, sure, I could collaborate and we could co-author the output, and I could be co-supervisor of that student, or I can just point you in the direction of some really great resources. So I found that a useful phrase. And also sometimes what I've offered to do is say, well, if you send me the data, I can do that analysis. And I won't necessarily teach them how to do that analysis. So I'm saying, sure, I can provide the service, and in exchange, you can have me as a co-author. So I guess there's different levels of collaboration that you might like to set up before you give away your hard-earned knowledge. In terms of supervision, I've got there to include informal and formal mentoring. And you may not have thought of what you've been doing as mentoring. You might have just been helping out some friends, or you might have been, staying in the lab and helping as a TA with some undergrads. Maybe you've been really helpful and responsive by email. So those are all supervision type, mentoring type jobs. So consider them your supervisions as well. And I've got a little tip down the bottom here. If somebody asks for your help, you might want to invite some other people and call it a workshop. And then you can pop it on your CV that you've organised this workshop. And if you want to take it a step further, you could organise for them to give you some evaluation of that workshop, maybe just a quick online Google poll or something. And then suddenly you're delivering formal workshops, you're responsive, you're gathering feedback, and you're going to be responsive to that feedback by changing that workshop to teach in different ways. So a bunch of these things, you're probably already doing them all the time, but may not necessarily be thinking about how to make them more apparent in your CV, all this work that you're already doing. And these can be online workshops as well. Maybe you've got some Twitter contacts and through them you help with some coding activity that they're doing. Well, you're an invited guest at a workshop now. So make sure you give yourself your credit. Okay, so we've got lots of ways to describe your research, but what is really compelling is having a strategy for that. And you probably have a strategy, but you may not have articulated it yet. So my suggestion would be just to grab a pen and paper or something, or on your desktop, whatever you like, and just take a moment. If you don't have a well-articulated research strategy yet, maybe just quickly write down a couple of points about the things that you most like about your research. You're welcome to share them if you want to on the chat, or just keep them to yourself, no problem. I'm just going to go grab my phone so I can keep track of the time better. And I'll just give you a moment to write down the things that you just like about it, the things that you feel really proud of yourself and satisfied when you do. Back in a moment. I just popped mine up on the PowerPoint there in case anyone was interested in some examples. Feel free to pop them in the chat if you feel like it, or to say them if you'd like to. Entirely up to you. All right. So if you look at the things that you've just made a few notes about, there might potentially be some unifying strand in there. And maybe as you were writing them, you were thinking, well, these are just the generic things that everybody, enjoys about their work or that's good about being a scientist. But chances are when you look at mine, they're actually quite different to what you had written down. And chances are that amongst all of us, they're actually really different from each other. So perhaps what you thought was, oh, this is, kind of conventional, I like something. Actually, it's probably quite unique to you. And you might be able to find a kind of a uniting thread there that you might then be able to describe as your research strategy. I tried to write up a few sentences that kind of cover those things, but in a sort of a job application style way. So I've described making discoveries and just, liking the diversity of nature there as that my research is curiosity driven, addressing fundamental ecological interactions between diverse species. So it's just kind of a way to, I guess, formalize that. And I've realized that what I really like doing is I really like to study animals that are important to people, or plants that are important to people. I didn't kind of realize that for a while, but I've realized it now. And so now I describe that as that I enhance the impact of my research by looking at things that are important to people. Maybe they're cultural or conservation important species, like orchids and seabirds, or things that are commercially important, like crops and fruit. And I study like pak choi pollination and blueberry pollination, things like that too. And I love blueberries. I really enjoy that. I've studied things that I want to eat. And I actually really like working with people as well. I find that really enjoyable aspect. And so I've kind of described it as I prioritize. So there's a few sentence starters if you're looking for them. My research is, I enhance my research impact by, I prioritize by, because you're doing these things already, but maybe it just hasn't you haven't articulated this yet, but that's your strategy. Does anyone have anything they want to say about that? Has anyone found that useful or?
There's already something on the chat.
Oh, thank you. Great. There we go. Novelty, innovative, impactful. Yep. Yep. So you found that strand in between there about systems thinking. Yep. Expansiveness, connections. Yep. I think it is really different for different people, and it's all valid. Yeah. Yep. And so someone's just popped on the statements are quite useful in cover letters, and yep, that's absolutely where we're heading to with this as well. Yep. So Julie's got there about that it's understudied things, new things that are novel. Great. Yeah, so I mean, already all those things are different from each other. New things, new skills. Yeah. So bringing out that kind of skills-based thing there, Michelle, might be something. And you're talking about how you've become a kind of a go-to person for people who want to know about bird syrinxes. So you're really developing a skills-based thing there, and those are super effective for other people wanting to collaborate and then finding new publications and grants and things like that. Yeah, so there's lots of things there that are actually kind of unique, and maybe I've got some other examples of wording as we kind of go on, but kind of actively describing them and not shying away from them as if it's, you know, any of these are weaknesses, but they're strengths. So that was kind of a research one. And that's often the area that people are a little bit more comfortable with, but ways to describe your teaching as well. And so I've got formal and informal and things like workshops, but also admin. Never underestimate the power of knowing how to do some teaching admin. It's typically the thing that people don't enjoy doing. And I think when I write reference letters for my students, I specifically say that they have extensive experience in all aspects of course administration. And I kind of list them, things like that, you know, setting up online learning platforms, setting and marking exams, and everything like that, because people are looking for someone who's going to be, you know, somebody who's easy to work with. So I just had some examples there of kind of formal things. Maybe you've done a bunch of formal stuff. Guest or regular lectures, labs, courses, field trips, and you might have done them as a TA or as a technician, or you know, but do describe the activity and your role within them, because different universities and different institutions have very different ways of doing teaching. And so at Auckland Uni, all the courses are team taught, so there's usually at least 2, sometimes, you know, 5 lecturers in each course. Whereas at other universities, it's one person who runs the whole thing. Or your role as a TA might involve actually quite a lot of independence, or, you know, it might not. There might be different ways. Different institutions have quite different ideas, so don't assume that people will know if you've said you've been a TA what that means. It might also mean extensive pastoral care, things like that. I've got a suggestion there to ask to be included in the student evaluations processes if you're doing guest lectures or leading activities. And you also might like to make your own online evaluation forms. Or sometimes you've got little comments back from a student that you've helped that says, thanks so much, I was really stressed about that and you've really sorted it out for me. Maybe you want to stick them in a little folder in your, you know, your job application stuff, so that you can whip it out and show that you're very responsive to student needs and able to tailor your teaching to suit individual learners. There's a bunch of informal teaching that we do all the time, just through collaboration and just through saying to people, oh, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And I've mentioned before my suggestion that you consider ways that you can kind of formalize those two by maybe doing workshops in your department or online, or you might like to run one of these for ASSAB. You might like to contact Julie and say that you have something, a technical thing you'd like to share, but without giving away all your IP, or you might have you know, some interesting thing that you've been doing. Maybe you've been volunteering at a community organisation, and you want to talk a little bit about what makes a good volunteer at community organisations, or, you know, things that are important to them. And, you know, you might like to make your own evaluation forms. And the final thing I had here was this admin and a list of stuff that potentially you've already done as a TA, but don't forget to add all that in. Dealing with plagiarism, you know, those sorts of things, it's all stuff that you've probably done. And here comes the teaching strategy. So you may just want to take a moment now to note a few things that you are really proud of in your teaching, or what you think are like the hallmarks of a great teacher. Maybe there's a teacher that's really inspired you and that you want to write down a couple of things that they've done that you think is great teaching. And you might think in terms of CPR. Every course could do with a bit of CPR. That's content, practice, or relationships. So there might be some content that you've made that you're really proud of. Or there might be a practice that you have in terms of how you've presented material, maybe something interactive. Or there might be something about the relationships that you kind of create with the students. So I'll just give you a moment to write them down while I eat my Tim Tam. And if you're not aiming for jobs that include these particular sort of criteria of research, teaching and service, then obviously this is an activity you can do for any type of criteria. All right, so I put mine up there. And I realize when I look at them now that mine are mostly to do with kind of the practice and the relationships rather than the content. Oh no, the third one's about content, isn't it? Oh, I think I've even got one of each. The first one's about relationships. The next one's about practice. And the last one's about content. And so the way I kind of expressed mine was that the first thing was it's really important to me when people feel good in the classroom. And I thought, well, why is that important? Why is it important for people to feel good? And I kind of drew on my animal behavior expertise there and went, well, when animals are stressed and frightened, it's really hard for them to solve puzzles or do new things. And people are just the same. So when people are feeling stressed and anxious and frightened or unwelcome, it's really hard for them to, relax out of fight and flight mode and be ready for new information. And I realized that's actually a really core part of my teaching, is that I want to create an environment where people can relax and feel that I want them to be there, or that not that I appreciate them being there. No obligation, but if they are there, I appreciate it, and that I hope they can, relax and set aside any feeling of being judged and feel good, and then be able to then tackle, the challenge of the content. And that second thing there, I really, really enjoy when you kind of give people a little bit of information, little bit, and then suddenly you see it, bing, and they've come up with a new idea, or they've suddenly understood a concept you're kind of working them to. And I think one of my favorite ever teaching evaluation comments was, well, she didn't really teach us anything. She made us find it all out by ourselves. And I was like, yes, job done. So that's something I personally really enjoy, but it's not going to be something that everybody enjoys. And again, this issue of authenticity, trying to do things that don't authentically feel right for you, it'll feel weird, and the students will be picking up on that. All right, so we've got one coming there from Julie, understanding your crowd, unjudgmental, using lots of examples. So there you're kind of talking about student-focused teaching. So the focus is it's not on you as I'm the teacher and I'm setting things here. You're putting the focus on the students and themselves. And that's a really wonderful and critical thing. And Lena's got the building relationships, being invested in their work, showing your respect with them, perhaps. And that collaboration, I guess that's coming out there, is that mutual respect, the ako, the teaching each other. So ako is the te reo Māori word for learning, and ako is the process of collaborative learning. So maybe the first few sentences, if you wanted to express your teaching strategy, you might want to say, I prioritize collaborative learning environments. For Lena or for Julie, you might say, I strategically focus on student-centered learning. And if you then have a look in the kind of the teaching literature and just Google those kind of words in Google Scholar, you'll find a bunch of teaching papers that say, oh yeah, this is a great teaching method. So you can even say kind of, inspired by this pedagogical approach, I do these things. And I found that quite handy, because as I've gone, what's really important to me is like a warm space that people feel good. And then I've just Googled warm teacher and in Google Scholar, and you get a bunch of papers that say, these are the hallmarks of the this thing. And then there's like 3 or 4 things, and then you're like, oh, number 4, hadn't done that before. Good idea. Okay, what's Yen got? Mentoring students at all levels. I do mean levels in terms of like first year, second year, third year, or do you mean like kind of different types of mentorship? That'd be something to explore there. Oh, being the go-to person. Yeah, yeah. That's nice. And not assuming someone knows something. Yeah. Yep. So bringing, say, your expertise, but in a way that's really meaningful for people, so that you're not imposing on them. You're bringing them with you. So maybe that's given you some ideas of how you might express your teaching strategy. All right. Service, the forgotten cousin of teaching and learning. And if you're aiming for work in other types of organisations as well, service is going to be a big part of it. Sometimes it's called service, sometimes it's called leadership. But these are the jobs, sure, they're helpful things you might do, but also often it's quite hard to coax out of people in a job interview. You know, you sort of say, so this topic of service, and people are often a bit, oh, what is this thing you're talking about? And you're like, oh, you know, useful actions, leadership for change. And people say things like, well, I guess I could run the seminar program. And sure, that's great. Yep, you know, these useful things that you can do. I've put some examples there. Yep, running things, being involved in open days. Sure, that is kind of that sort of service. But there's this other aspect of service that takes that a step further, for what sort of areas in which you might really, you know, bring good things in this organisation. And you can do it in ways that aren't kind of criticising the organisation as well. So you can say, well, you know, I see in your strategic plan that one area you're talking about is like sustainability. That's something that I really feel I could really contribute to. And you might be able to say, you know, you would like to, you might find there's existing networks. I put a few of the examples of kind of networks that we have at University of Auckland. Existing networks related to these things, and then, you know, maybe one day in the future there's this idea I've got that, you know, so I've always been really interested in equity related things and just a sense of justice and fairness, and I've kind of made that my thing. And so you know, I kind of say, well, you know, I'd like to be involved in equity things in a departmental, in a local level, but you know, getting more skills on that by connecting with existing people who are doing that kind of work. So I have you can think what your service strategy might be as well. You know, maybe it's sustainability, maybe it is getting students kind of ready for the workplace. Maybe it's building connections between that workplace and a community organisation or something that you're connected with, or anything that is kind of stuff that's important to you and that's meaningful to you, and then you might be supporting them. So supporting international students. You've probably got lots of empathy for students at the moment, so that's always a good place to start. And I would suggest, just as like a strategic general career thing, to focus on one area of service, and something that might link to your research or kind of teaching. So, you know, conservation and sustainability and community groups is a really nice kind of cluster, just so that you don't spread yourself too thin. And I really like, if I'm doing something, that I can kind of count it as research or teaching or service, like any one action. It'd be great if it connected with any of those things. So yeah, so you can reflect on that service strategy anytime you like. I just had a few tips about kind of communicating things. So we've been doing some practicing wording those strategies. And just in terms of writing things out, if there's criteria, or if you're kind of working on a CV aiming for, you know, types of criteria, remember that spreadsheet that someone's likely filling in. And if you've ever marked things and you've got your marking rubric and you want to, like, do they have this? Yes, they have that. Tick that box, move on. You want them to tick all your boxes. So name each of the criteria using the same words as in the position description, and answer them in order. You know, in a cover letter, if there's big criteria, put them in that cover letter, absolutely. And don't skip any criteria, even if they're things that you have personal commitment to, or you aim to develop in that area, or you have, initial steps showing your potential in that area. Those are great. I did a promotion application a while ago, and I gave it to sort of a trusted person in another department, and she was already at that level. And she looked through it, and then she kind of very kindly said to me, "So after reading this, I know a lot about you. I know a lot about you and what you've been doing. I can see you've been doing lots of great stuff, but I just don't see how these things match the criteria." And I think that's when we flip from, so the first time you write it for yourself, and then you rewrite it for the reader. So naming each criteria and using the words. I think I even wrote a little example of that in a moment. As a little suggestion for a structure, you might like to start by naming that criterion, and then whipping out your beautiful new strategy that you've just devised. A very brief explanation of why you do that, and then some examples of your actions. In reality, I think I would always probably write like number 4 first. I'd go, and do my couple of actions, and then I go back and say what my strategy is and why I'm doing that. And then I kind of jump down to the bottom. I guess it's a bit like writing your paper. You do your methods and results first, and then you kind of fill in the other bits. If you have number 5, a brief assessment of the effectiveness of your actions, that's great. And I guess if you're kind of building your CV, you might think of opportunities where you might be able to get that kind of assessment. So I wrote like a little example paragraph there, and you might like to put the criterion in bold. So just say the criteria is teaching, curriculum, leadership, and using feedback from students. Say it exactly the same. Don't make it hard for them. Don't feel like they're going to be bored of seeing the same phrase over and over in all those applications. They're going to be so happy that you've clearly addressed each criteria. And then I've got kind of, as a teaching assistant in those years, here's the strategy: developing students' practical career skills to enhance their employability. And then I kind of thought of an example of something that you might show that. You co-developed some new things in a lab. And then, I put a little thing about the class seeming to go well. Maybe an action. I later provided a list of phrases students could use on their CVs. And then, maybe the student evaluations for that year, and was like, I just didn't know what was expected of me. I want more feedback. Everyone always says that. I want more feedback. I don't know what was expected of me in the assignment. I didn't know what I needed to do. And so then you might do some marking rubric, and then, their mark might have gone up or something. Or maybe you made the instructions clearer, or maybe next time you taught the lab, you spent a bit more time helping out with this, or maybe after the lab, people contacted you about this thing and you helped them one-on-one and sent a Canvas announcement, or sorry, our platform's called Canvas at Auckland Uni, sent some announcement. So, an action, some sort of follow-up, some sort of reflection on how effective you think that was for the students, even if you don't have some formal thing like their grades or an evaluation or something. You can talk about how it felt as a teacher doing that in the class and whether you thought people found it useful. So I found that a good structure. Criterion really clear, your sort of strategy, what you did and why. How about some diagrams? If there's a scientist reading your application, they will be so pleased if you make them a diagram. One of the classic diagrams might be kind of a little research diagram, something like that, where you put the publications on the left and the citations on the right. And if you do it cumulative, it's always going to go up, of course. So don't put the absolute number of papers you did in each year, just cumulatively add them onto the previous one and your citations. And you can get that from if you've set yourself up a little Google Scholar profile, it'll collate all that for you. You could put things in like if you got a prize from a conference, or you got a little grant, pop your parental leave on, things like that. I think they can be quite useful. diagram like that. Or you might do like a teaching thing, like a little table. This table isn't very attractive. I'm sure you can find another one. But yeah, you might be able to have some table that shows your work as a TA, what your role was. And I take the opportunity. Oh, here's a question from Julie. Yep.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask you, where would you put the diagram? Would you put it in, like on the CV in the end of it? Would you put it the cover letter? Like, where do you see the diagram fitting?
I think any of those. I'd say stick it in the cover letter as well. I think just put it in one place. So not in the CV and the cover letter. But I think if you're wanting to say something like, I have a growing reputation as a productive researcher, and you stick it in just as a little one to the side. I also think that can be handy because, you know, if you're like looking at rental ads for flats or something, for apartments, when they have something like room with a view, it's quite memorable, even if it doesn't make that much, you know, sense to the thing. And they do, you know, you see all the ads for houses and they'll say something, some little catchphrase in a picture. And I'm sure that those, because then when you're looking at the flat listings and you're going, oh, I think I'll call about room with a view. So I think it's almost like a little, you know, we're animal behavior people. Let's manipulate the behavior of people who are reading our stuff and give them something that's some memorable thing. So I think a little diagram.
Oh.
Absolutely, if it addresses some criteria, like they say you need to have teaching experience, you might just pop a little table in of all the courses you've taught. And I kind of used this to try and advertise some of the special stuff I brought to that class as well, because I wanted to show I had leadership in doing those classes. Another teaching diagram that you might like to do if you have this kind of data is something that shows some intervention in a kind of a data-y way. So maybe you've got attendance or marking time, or maybe you can quantify like how many email inquiries students sent you as a TA, you know, when you in one year and then next year you tweaked the information a bit, or you told the lecturer could they please add this to it, and then you got way less next year or something. This is one that I did because I had the power as the lecturer to do this. We used to have these evening tests for 2 hours and I hated running them. And I just felt it's nighttime, people want to be at home, it's not fair to ask people to be here. So I just changed it to tests during, 3 little tests during class, and actually used exactly the same set of questions, same pool of questions, and the mark went up. You know, I wouldn't say that was a hugely rocket sciencey kind of innovation. I just didn't like doing the evenings myself and felt that nobody else would want to. But now I'm saying, oh, look, I've made this innovation. I think it was really important to help people in the class. Their grades got better. So yeah, maybe you can think of some way, a little figure or a diagram, flow chart, something like that to help the scientists who are reading all of these applications. I just have a final couple of tips. One is to make sure that you explain things that are specific to your discipline or to you. I guess particularly if you're applying for work in a field where maybe you'll be like the only person of your specialty in that department, or maybe you're applying to a company or a research organization that typically, you know, there's lots of other types of roles there, not necessarily scientists, that you might want to explain things. So I had a few kind of suggestions of sort of researchy sort of stuff. So maybe you don't have any grants, but maybe you don't need any grants. You know, I look at flowers that don't really need stuff. It's not like those medical labs where they have to sustain, you know, an actual space, and they have to sustain staff and machines and stuff. I think our field can be relatively cheap, and maybe other people wouldn't know that. If you have got a grant, maybe you can find out the typical success rate. Sometimes they have it on their web pages. Publications and author order. Some fields just do alphabetical author orders, so and some don't, and you know, maybe you want to explain if being first author is a significant thing, or being the sole author or something. And your contribution to kind of group efforts. In terms of teaching, I had to mention, if it was say group or solo teaching, have you been allowed to be a formal supervisor? Maybe you've actually helped a bunch of people, but you've never been named formal supervisor, because that's not typical for master's students or PhD students, or you were in a role in an organization where people weren't kind of crediting you, but you're nonetheless helping a bunch of people achieve their ends. And then for yourself, you might want to talk about your service, community roles that you have that are important, and building connections, parental leave and career breaks. I put a couple of links there. Let's go to that. So a lot of institutions have achievement relative to opportunity policies, and these describe that when people have had career breaks, or for whatever reason, here they've listed responsibilities to whānau, hapu, iwi, and hapori. So that's community roles that you have, care responsibilities, being unwell, these sorts of things. Anything that has meant that you weren't working as much as other people might have been. At Auckland Uni, the policy is that you have to look at the quality of the items rather than the quantity. So you might say something like you've had some career breaks due to, family circumstances, but you want to draw their attention to the quality of your work when you've been available to work on it. And some people calculate that quality in quite formal ways. Let me just go back to that. Here's a little career gaps calculator. So the link is there. It's actually a New Zealand one from the Royal Society, which is the main New Zealand research organisation, and it gives you this little spreadsheet here. There you go. And so you can put in how your FTEs, so that's your full-time equivalent. So you'd put a 1 in if you're working full-time. You might put a 0.5 in if you're working, 2.5 days a week. And you kind of can color code other things, parental leave, unemployment. Oh, the instructions are in here as well. And there's an example of somebody. And so, it turns out that over 15 years, you've actually only had 11 years of full-time equivalent. So you can use things like that. So you can say, so I had some career breaks due to various situations and circumstances. So over the past 5 years, I've actually done 2.5 years of full-time work. And in that time, I've, done these achievements. And so you're inviting the person who's reading it to say, well, if they had the opportunity to work at full-time for 5 years, they would have doubled those outputs. So maybe some useful tools there. And just a final few words on your word choice. So after you've written things up in your CV or your job application, you might like to just have a reflect on whether you're using active words that really reflect your actual work, or whether you're kind of using descriptors that are kind of underselling what you've been doing. So rather than helping a lecturer or helping a researcher, you might describe yourself as collaborating, partnering. Instead of helping or assisting a student, you might have supervised them or mentored them. There's some other ones. Instead of saying you organised or facilitated, you might have say that you led it or drove it. And instead of say words like basic, you might like to use words like fundamental. And a couple of links here. One of them is a gender bias calculator. You can actually copy and paste in text in there, and it'll tell you whether it's a kind of, you use more words that people associate more with women, or words that people associate more with men. The debate is, should you have to modify how you talk about yourself or not? And I guess that's a thorny one for everyone to consider. But do make sure that you're not giving people the excuse to underrate your capacity and talent. Typically, when people read the CVs and job applications of women, they're constantly seeking evidence. And when they read the job applications and CVs of men, instead they're looking for potential. And obviously, both evidence and potential are really important. And I think, why not say you have both? The other thing here is just a little link you just may want to give to your supervisors or people who are writing letters. And it's a useful table about avoiding gender bias in reference letter writing. So people do tend to write women and men quite different types of letters. And this is a handy PDF that has a bunch of kind of things to do. And it's got kind of the papers and things. Has it got the papers there? Yeah, it's got some papers listed at the bottom there. Adjectives to avoid, adjectives to include. So yeah, I find this very helpful when writing letters. And yeah, you may want to share that with the people who are potentially writing you letters at some point in the future. So I made the TLDR version as well of this presentation. Common issues is not addressing every criteria in order and focusing too much on research. Not finding out about the organisation, especially these teaching and service things. Assuming the reader knows your field or the importance of anything. And part of that is not explaining your own role in collective activities. And my TLDR of what could I do now to add to my CV or to, I guess, build the CV either in terms of actions or just in terms of kind of writing and polishing what you've already got, is to make sure you gain the credit from your work by not giving away things, and to build your teaching and service. I guess, perhaps you've already done that in person, but you just haven't expressed that on paper yet. And you may want to make yourself a little spreadsheet to record your activities. I actually do this to keep track so that when I need to apply for stuff, I can say, oh yeah, what did I do? So I actually have a tab for sort of different types of activities. And when I help somebody with something, or, I write a reference letter, or I, contact a group and, initiate something, I actually pop it in my little spreadsheet with just the date and the action. There's a message in the chat saying the gender bias one. Yes, the links afterwards. Yes. I wonder how I should do that. I could probably...
I think I could be able to send an email to all participants.
Yeah, maybe that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, and if not, we'll be posting these things on the website, and then we can put the links underneath as well.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll make you a little thing there. My last suggestions was to, work out your strategies, as well as it being kind of helpful to have them ready so that when the job ad comes up, you can kind of trot them out. I find them quite useful to guide what I should and shouldn't be spending my time on. There's, there's so much you could do. You can't do everything. How do we decide? In some ways, it's having those strategies can help you declutter a bit. So you can decide, maybe I will drop these things because I've decided that my research strategy is this thing, or I've decided that my service strategy is this thing. So maybe I will drop just a couple of those things that I'm doing and just focus on these ones. So saying no to some things that you're already doing is saying yes to the other things that are actually more important to you or that serve you better in your aspirations and development. And when things come in, you get asked to do things. You can think about it. I think I mentioned yesterday to Julie and others who were in the ASSAB planning meeting, my top 3 responses when somebody asks me to do something. The number 1 is, oh, sounds interesting. What are you planning to do on that? What are your plans? Oh. The next one is, oh, sounds interesting. I recommend that person. Or number 3 is, sounds interesting. What of these current things should I drop to make that happen? So, might be useful for you. I use them all the time. And my final suggestion is, finding your people. Finding people who, you can develop trusting, mutually respectful relationships with to help you keep going when things are difficult, and to energize you, to return you to a more positive state before you go out again. So there we go. That's it. That's what I have for you today.
Do people have any questions for Anne, or want to add something, an interesting link that you've seen or anything?
Yeah, or maybe you've got some interesting experience or thing that you think would be useful for other people.
We can't hear you, Justin. I see you trying to talk to us,
Oh,
but we cannot hear you.
sorry, I can't see you on the screen. Great. Oh, there's a few things in the chat. Thank you, everybody.
Maybe Justin, as your microphone, did you try to do it without the headphones or something?
Great. So hopefully that wasn't incredibly depressing. I know I certainly used to feel pretty down after going to things. One thing I have noticed is that whatever people have done themselves is always what they say you have to do. So if people are like, oh, you have to change countries, oh, you have to do it like this, you have to do it like that, I'm like immediately suspicious, because it always turns out that's what they did. So, so there's a question there about strategy, changing strategy. Yeah, I mean, I think your strategy is yours, right? So I think you can change whenever it suits you. Absolutely. It's yours for empowering you. So I think change whatever you like. And, your strategy might broaden or narrow, and different phases of, the year, different times of your life, different strategies will be, will chime truer with you. So I think, absolutely. I mean, I think one sort of general strategy that I would suggest is, if you maybe being geographically, if you are very fixed on a particular type of work or a particular thing you want to study, then you might need to be more geographically flexible, move to other places. Whereas maybe if you are happy to be broader with the type of work you do, then you can, maybe you can be flexible with the type of work, but less flexible with the geography. Like, you want to be in a particular location, and you say, but I'll do anything in that location, and try and find some meaning within those. And you can take a job, you're not saying you're keeping it too. So if you get offered something, you get offered a postdoc, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're promising to do it for the entire time. You've no obligation beyond that. Your obligation is to have integrity and do robust work, and to have integrity by treating other people fairly. But if you take a job and then a month later you get something you'd rather do, then off you go. Don't feel like you have to keep doing something that you're doing. You can, you're opening up that opportunity for somebody else to take it if it's not the right thing for you. So I mean, I went to America for a while. It was a 3-year contract, but it was just very, very it was heaps of field work, heaps of travel. My partner was here in New Zealand. I was in America. We were kind of flying backwards and forwards. I just got really burnt out. And and I thought, yeah, I can't stay and finish this contract. I'm just getting too worn out. I'm too unhappy. I loved being in America when my partner was there with me, and we had a lot of fun, enjoying things there as well. But it wasn't what I wanted to keep doing. And so then I kind of got the chance to fill in for somebody who had got offered another job and wanted to leave where they were in New Zealand, and asked if I would kind of just fill in for them at short notice with the teaching. And so I did that. And then and so it was kind of good because I could leave America saying, you know, thank you, I've really appreciated it, but I have this opportunity to do some work that I think would really help me, you know, get to the sort of work I particularly want to do. And, you know, I felt, you know, it was inconvenient for them to have to find somebody new, but, you know, somebody new got a job too. So, and I did end up getting the lecturing work here after that. I think getting the student evaluation. So when I taught that fill-in thing, I got some student evaluations done kind of formally. And that meant that when the job interview eventually came up for that position permanently, I was able to say, well, I actually taught some of the courses that are needed for this job. And, you know, I've got these things here. They're not perfect, but I can really see how I can improve. That was good. And Justin's made the suggestion of keeping track of applications that were successful and then using that as an inspiration. Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry. It's just I wanted to kind of expand a little bit in the other question. So I guess as a PhD student, like my worry is that, for example, the field that we are in at the moment is kind of defining the strategy that we will take. So like kind of like narrowing down the possibilities of jobs that we can apply to what we are already doing. So I feel my question is, for example, if we were to change to a different field, completely different field, it like I think it would impact our CV, because I would be worried that on one hand the experience that I had won't be relevant for this new field, and on the other hand I would have to get a lot more training to catch up. So yeah, my question is like maybe how to deal with that in the applications.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of skills that you have as a student are really widely applicable. And I would say in general, workplaces are looking for capable, reliable, honest people. I would say that that's actually really critical, more than necessarily it being exactly the right topic knowledge. So, and I think if you described it as, so previously my strategy was this, now I'm pursuing a change of career direction, so I want to focus on. Maybe that would be useful, because part of having the strategy is just that people know that you have a strategy, regardless of what it is. So maybe saying, so previously I strategically did these actions. Some of that is transferable to this new career in these ways, but areas that I see as great potential for me are, so I think, yeah, I don't think it would limit you, because I think any strategy and being able to say what that strategy is really compelling for the reader. And as I was talking about all those different teaching and research strategies that people have, just being able to express it as a strategy is really gives you such an advantage, because so many job applications, people say, you know, do you have teaching experience? And people will say, yes, I've taught in this course and I've taught in that course, and I did this thing and I did that thing. And that's all good, that's evidence, but to take it that step forward further to make you look more like a professional operator is having a statement of strategy, regardless of what that strategy is.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, you've got a message there in the chat for you as well, Laura, talking about the transferable ones. Yeah, and I mean, genuinely, after being on job interviews, people skills are really useful. Yes, professional respect for other people. And it's always that balance, isn't it, between accurately conveying your own work, but also not wanting, feeling like you don't want to look like you're, egotistical or selfish as well. But I think you can express that in other ways as well. So you can say, yes, I am very confident in my research and I really enjoy collaborating. So you can convey that it's not all about you all the time by talking about other things as well, rather than necessarily only talking about, that's the trouble with only talking about your own research. If you kind of are just talking about my research, what I did, I've done this, I've done that, it's hard to convey those other skills that will make you such a valuable colleague and employee to work with. Well, here we go.
Oh,
40.
thank you so much, Anne. It was really, really nice to have so many applicable tips, and yeah, really, really cool. Yeah, I guess we can do a virtual applause.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for listening. I used this workshop on I've recently applied for something, and so I put in there that it was a mark of my, the criteria was my international eminence. And I said that I was providing this international workshop, Australia, New Zealand, as an invited speaker to talk about these things. So there we go. So you've helped my CV as well by coming along for me today. So thank you. Mutual benefit.